Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the stream. Welcome to the stream. How's that sounding? How's that sounding? I'm trying to talk over the music at the same time. First time I've ever tried to have done that. All right, let's stop the music. Yeah, just look at that X. We'll play it one more time. One more time. There we go. How's everybody doing tonight? It's another Thursday, another Uncut History. And before we go into anything else, let's just start off on a fun note. How's it going, History Savior 1941? Glad you can catch the stream tonight. Before we continue, just gonna share my stream just for the fun of it. No, not talking about him. Let's look at that. Let's look at that wonderful meme that's been created on the Civil War Lampoon's Facebook page. I love it. I don't know if you've ever bought. There's a series of Civil War books. I forget. They're all by different authors, but they have the similar text on this like dark crimson cursive for the name of it. I like this. James Brown's raid, Harper's Ferry, and the hardest working man in show business. Been a very, very different raid if James Brown was there, but John Brown was there instead, not James Brown, not James Brown. So, how's everybody doing? How's their interesting cover? Indeed, indeed, it's coming soon. It's coming soon. So, what we're going to be doing on this week's stream today is the 161st anniversary of the Battle of Shiloh. And what better way than talking about the Battle of Shiloh than talking about its most famous chapter, which is the Hornet's Nest. Now, something to consider is this. The Hornet's Nest is up there in names of the Peach Orchard, the Bloody Pond, the Sunken Road, and to be honest, I think just about every major battlefield in North America got those three things. They all got a bloody pond. Think about it. Lake George in the French-Indian War got a bloody pond, believe it or not. Peach Orchard, well, Gettysburg got a peach orchard too. Every Civil War battlefield, I swear, got a sunken road, and then they start competing over who got the deeper sunken road. Fredericksburg got one, Antietam got one. I think everybody got one. There's even a few slaughter pens out there. But a hornet's nest. Now, hornet's nest is used as a term throughout military history, but off the top of my head, American Civil War, there is only one, and it comes to mind the Battle of Shiloh. As such, when people go visit Shiloh National Battlefield, they hone in on wanting to see where the hornet's nest occurred. And as a young child, when I first got into history, how I learned about the Battle of Shiloh was through the hornet's nest. I can remember at a very young age, uh, when most kids my age woke up early to watch something like Pokemon, right before that, I'd make sure to tune into Civil War Combat on the History Channel. And my dad, who was stationed at one point at 40 in Town Gap, oh, not stationed, passing through, he was at the gift shop and he saw a 4-disc set for Civil War Combat. Knew I liked the show, brought it home, and one of those 4 episodes was prioritizing the Hornet's Nest. So I've had it hammered to my head. This is where the bloodiest fighting occurred. This is where the grandest stuff. Preparing to do this live stream, I realized that is not entirely true. That the Hornet's Nest is more mythological. When I say mythological, I make it sound like it's a study. Mythological than actual factual. That's not to say the Hornet's Nest is not a prominent feature of the Battle of Shiloh, but it was not this turning point that historians have made it out to be. And we'll explain why it became hyped up over the years. What is the facts from the fiction? So without further ado, let's set the stage. It is spring of 1862, and the Army of the Tennessee, commanded by Ulysses S. Grant, is making its way down the Tennessee River. Now, earlier in February of 1862, Grant smashed through the Confederate line that went along the northern border of Tennessee, dividing Union states from Confederate states. And he did so by taking the forts of Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. These are his first major victories as a general in the Union Army. So Grant is making his way up in the ranks. He's going to take a fleet of steamboats and he's going to go right through Tennessee, the heart of Tennessee, very quickly. And when he gets to southern Tennessee, he's going to offload his troops 20 miles north from the Tennessee Mississippi border. And his goal is to offload his army and go by land to surround and cut off a critical railroad juncture known as Corinth, Mississippi. Two major railroads bisect here. The one you need to know important about is the I'm always, you can tell it's being live, and I'm trying to forget. It's the, I think it's the, if I'm mistaken, the Mississippi and Charleston Railroad, which runs from the Mississippi River through Corinth, Mississippi, all the way to Charleston, South Carolina. If Grant gets control of Corinth, Mississippi, he will have cut off one of the, if not the most pivotal rail line in the Confederate States of America. They will have one of the early accesses between the Mississippi River to the Atlantic Ocean have been severed. So it's imperative that he gets there in rapid time. Now, tasked with defending the tasked with defending Corinth, Mississippi is the Army of Mississippi, commanded by Albert Cindy Johnston. Now, Johnston only got about 45,000 soldiers to field against Grant's Army of Tennessee, which is similar of about 50,000 soldiers. But Grant is also going to get reinforcements from the Army of the Ohio, commanded by John Carlos Buell, and that'll put Grant at about 70,000. So Johnston knows that if Grant and Buell are able to unite before they attack Corinth, Mississippi, he's in trouble. So, and I hope you, yeah, like I said, I've always thought this was the key event, and I still believe it's a pivotal event. We'll explain why the Hornets Nest, but my myths were shattered this week. I'm responding to History Saver 1941's comment. So Johnson comes up with this bold strategy. He is going to attack Grant's army at their encampments at Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee. And I know some of you are thinking, because some of yins are, oh, does that have to relate to Pittsburgh? Believe it or not, no. It has nothing. It's not named after the city of Pittsburgh. It's named after a tavern owned by a Mr. Pritz in the area. It has no relation. But fun trivia. So Johnston is going to throw the Confederate Army of Mississippi at Grant's Army of the Tennessee. And his mission is swing them to the west, away from their supply lines on the Tennessee River, put them in the swamps of a location known as Owl Creek, and force Grant to surrender. Easier said than done, of course. The terrain that Grant's army is encamped on is predominantly uphill. So if Johnston wants to attack from the south going north, he is going to be going uphill. This brings us to the events of April 6, 1862. And if I learn how to share the darn screen. There we go. How do I get back to the screen? There we go. Sorry about that. I'm still learning. So this map is provided to us by the American Battlefield Trust, and it has shown you the location of the Union encampments the morning of April 6, 1862. You can see we have all sorts of encampments here. We have W.H.L. Wallace's division, who's going to become very important in our story today. We got Hulbert's division over here. William Tecumseh Sherman's division. Yes, this is early in the war. Sherman's only a division commander. He's not in charge of an army yet. McClellan's division. And way down here, another important figure in today's stories, Benjamin Prentiss, who you probably saw me teasing about earlier. So early on the morning, about 5 a.m. on April 6th, Johnston is going to launch his attack. And like I said, we got about, I'm grabbing my notebook. I'm going to try to keep I try to be semi-organized on this channel. So we got Johnston's army of about 45 soldiers in full force assaulting the southern fringes of Grant's encampment. Now, it should be noted that the elements of the Union Army had an idea that the Confederates were mounting a surprise attack, but a lot of the higher ups were not believing it. They thought these are mere skirmishers. They did not think it was the full army of Mississippi. So much so that Sherman himself, early in the morning, is going to ride out to go see what's all the shooting about. He rides out and he's looking across his field and he can see Confederate skirmishers moving in the tree line. But he doesn't look to his right, where a whole Confederate regiment is lined up and fire a volley, wounds Sherman in the hand, kills his orderly, and Sherman now realizes, oh crap, we're under a serious attack. So all these Union soldiers, they're woken up early April 6th to the sounds of musket fire and artillery and the rebel yell, Prentice's encampment, which you can see here in the center, is overran. Colonel Peabody tries to rally his brigade, but is killed in a few minutes early into the fighting. The southern encampments are completely overran by the Confederates in no matter. Now, what this is going to lead to is the northern encampments to be woken up and ordered immediately to the south to immediately try to set up a defensive position. And indeed, they will start doing so. So let's fast forward here around 9 o'clock in the morning here at the Battle of Shiloh. Now, most of the Shiloh battlefield is heavily forested, and you can see all the green on the map here. There are a few fields, and it might be hard to see on the screen. There are a few brownish spots on the map. Those are the few cotton and farm fields that are within the perimeter of the battlefield. So those are the only real openings that you can really see enemy formations. Everything else is massed in forest. It's very confusing. And in the confusion, you'll notice a good portion of Johnston's Confederate army are attacking on the western edge, particularly around Shiloh Church, which is where the name of the battle comes from. And it's a very modest church. It was just a wooden church, a one room. It was even more modest than the Dunker Church in Antietam, honestly. And that's modest in itself. If those watching know what I'm talking about. And to add to the irony, the name Shiloh is a Hebrew word for, place of peace. So, what are the odds of a massive battle occurring around this church? But most of Johnston's efforts are on the western side. The On the eastern side, you'll also notice we got some efforts pushing around. In the center, there's not a whole lot happening, and this is going to allow for Union forces to gather in the center and try to form a new defensive line from Owl Creek to the Tennessee River. And that's what you're seeing on this map. So starting from left to right, Sherman is giving up ground, but not without a fight. Then moving to his right, we got McClernand's division, who have now fully assembled, and that was my notebook falling. They're fully assembling, taking the brunt of the attack. And then we get to the center, where we see WHL Wallace forming right here near the crossroads of the Corniff, Mississippi Road and the Eastern Corniff Road. Now, a little bit of a background. WHL Wallace. I'm going to give you guys a seizure right now. William H.L. Wallace uh, had a very good career before the war. I was a lawyer in Illinois, really had no reason to be in the army, but he felt that it was his rightful cause, so he volunteered, and eventually was made a general of this division by the time he gets to Shiloh. And this is his first major battle in command of division. So he's going to put his men on a wagon road with his right flank, and then for a second, Ryan, think that we're in the position. We're in Wallace's eyes right now, looking south to wherever Johnston's men are attacking. His right flank will be anchored to McClernand's line, which is slowly starting to fall back, trying to stabilize, but slowly falling back. His left flank is going to end roughly around what is known as the Peach Orchard, or I think it's called the Sarah Bell Cotton Farm. To be fair, I'm not the biggest historian on Shiloh. I've only been focusing on the Hornets nest this past week. So this is not, I am no, by no means a professional historian, but I think I've jargled this together somewhat competently. So his left flank will be connected to Hobart's division and whatever's left of Prentice's division near the Peach Orchard. But they're on this wagon trail, which will later be called the Sunken Road. There's, if you see photo, and you will see some images later on, there is no sunken road. It's a very barely visible wagon trace, shortcut for a few farmers going between the two major roads that cross the battlefield today. What makes this spot so unique? The western side of this wagon road is relatively open, one of the few open spots on the battlefield. It's the Duncan Field, and there's a small cabin there, and it's completely fenced off with a rail post fence. But as you get further west, it enters this thicket of undergrowth, which is new growth undergrowth, all sorts of jagger bushes and things like that. Really hard to get through. So we're not talking about a forest, more just this sprawl of undergrowth, which is really good to mask your forces. And History Savior 1941. Interesting that you're doing this today as I'm heading to Kennesaw Mountain later next week to film Johnston and Sherman's combat in that area. Ooh. Shiloh was a preliminary to those actions to come. Now, when we talk about Johnston, I don't think we're talking about the same Johnston. I think you're talking about the Johnston in the east who came west, where we're talking about a Johnson who's about to, he ain't making it past April 6th, 1862. Spoilers. Spoilers. But hey, I've heard Kennesaw Mountain is, I think, like in terms of acreage, the largest battlefield in the national park system. It's from what I've said, and it's not because of preservation efforts, but more just because the city of Atlanta won the giant walking park, and it just kind of worked out with the historians. Like, we want to preserve the battlefield. You want a place to walk out of the city. 12 mile. Wow. When I go to Gettysburg, well, here in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg's like the big thing. And Gettysburg is one of only two major Civil War battlefields I've been to. I've been to Antietam as well. Is Harper's Ferry major? I've been to Harper's Ferry many times. I don't consider it a major battlefield. So I'm so used to thinking Gettysburg's big. Gettysburg's puny compared to some of these sites farther out west. So, where was I talking about? Oh, right, the Hornets' nest of Shiloh. So here we are again. So Wallace has a really good defensive position. And around 10 a.m., what's going to start happening is as as General Johnson is pushing his men to the west, they're actually kind of moving northwest. The Confederates are kind of turning to the northwest because they're again trying to push the Union to the west into the swamps of Owl Creek. So what starts happening is we start getting brigades such as the Brigade of Schaefer and the Brigade of Stevens. They start coming through Duncan Field. They don't see Wallace's division because they're masked by the undergrowth. Wallace realizes what he has on his hands and tells them, fire into their flanks. The Confederates are completely caught off guard. They were not expecting to meet Union resistance at this location. So they fall out of Duncan Field and they report their higher command, hey, there's Union soldiers to the east of us. There shouldn't be Union soldiers to the east of us. So, and this is the first shots are really fired at what will become known as Hornets Nest around 10:30 a.m. So what ends up happening is General Cheatham, who again, I hope I don't got the Shane Coran wrong. I believe Cheatham is in Hardee's Corps. I hope I'm not saying that wrong. Uh, oh yeah, where is Cheatham at? Where's Cheatham on the map? Well, there's Clayburn. It's all foo bars. You can clearly see. It's all foo bars. You clearly can see. Okay. Anyways, so eventually, General Benjamin Cheatham of the Confederates tells Stevens, go ahead and try to drive those Federals out of the thickets. Well, that goes as best according to plan. So here's a good image that this is, I believe, a diorama at the Shiloh Visitor Center. This is from the National Park Planner website. National Park Planner. Great website if you want to get an overview of some of these battlefields. And this diorama gives a really good idea. To the right, you can see Duncan Field. It's in the open. But here to the left, you're starting to see those thickets take hold. The Confederates have no idea. They think they're facing off against some stragglers, not a well-organized division of Union soldiers. So Stevens' brigade goes in and they get shot to pieces. They get shot to pieces. We also have Robert Shaw's brigade of Arkansas is trying to make their way in. They're blown to bits. It's not going very well, as one would quote later on, actually from Benjamin Cheatham. The enemy opened upon us from his entire front a terrific fire of artillery and musketry, when another part of the enemy force concealed and protected by the fence and thrust on us on our left, opened a murderous crossfire upon our lines. So this first attack on this thicket is repulsed very easily by the Union. Grant gets word that we got a strong force of Union soldiers who have reformed the line here at Shiloh. He's going to go meet up with the commander. So he's going to meet with Wallace. He's going to meet with Prentice. He's going to meet with Colbert, all the available staff he can get, and basically gives the order to everybody that they need to hold at all hazards. Remember this. Grant told all commanders to hold at all hazards, basically hold out to the last possible minute. Let's see how literal some of these people accidentally take it. So as we move into midday, the attacks are going to intensify on the Hornet's Nest. And the problem with attacking the Hornet's Nest is this. As we've stated, Johnston's attention is to wheel the Union Army west into the swamps of Owl Creek. But due to the confusion of the terrain, two-thirds of his army is on the western side of the battlefield. Rather than driving them into Owl Creek, they're starting to wheel the Union Army toward the Tennessee River, toward the Union Army supply line. This is not something Johnston wants. So Johnston personally will ride over to the eastern edge of the battle, over here, and starting to push the corps on the eastern side of the field to intensify the attack on the peach orchard. He also needs to try to push the center back, where Wallace is stationed and Prentiss is stationed. Braxton Bragg will be in charge of dealing with the center as core, but the problem is Bragg only got one brigade left. All of his others are either engaged elsewhere or they're torn to bits. So Bragg starts running around the battlefield and trying to pull these different brigades so he's just cherry picking from other people's commands, which is something you don't want happening. You don't want people overriding the chain of command, especially in a chaotic situation like Shiloh. So what ends up happening is every attack the Confederates make on Wallace and Prentiss's position on the wagon road, it's only by a brigade or even just a regiment. It's not enough to drive out Wallace. What you need to do is Johnston's army needs to amass at least a full division division against division. So we have multiple attacks on the Hornet's Nest, but what should be kept in mind is these attacks are made up with very few soldiers. They're just going in piecemeal, and they're indeed being chewed up. But because of the lack of numbers, they can't do much. They can't make much of a dent into the defense. And I think at least one brigade, the brigade commanded by Gibson over here, he had a brigade of Louisiana and Arkansas soldiers. They attacked this position 4 different times. And every time they would go in, they would come back, and either one of the colonels or Gibson himself would tell Bragg, we need artillery. We can't dislodge the enemy with just one brigade. And Braxton denies artillery because it's needed elsewhere on the battlefield. So you're seeing the situation that this is creating. All right, let's move over here. And this is another really good illustration to show you the terrain we're dealing. It's a very unique terrain. I mean, the whole battlefield's covered in forest, but just again, we're dealing with brush. We're not dealing with old growth trees. This is new growth brush. And you can see in here all the thickets. You can see the Union soldiers firing into the Confederates. I don't know what the cabin's supposed to be for. Maybe that's Duncan's cabin. Not fully certain. Oh, we're spoiling ahead. So every time one of these Confederate attacks are made and they're repulsed, it's emboldening the Union soldiers in its line. They think, "Hey, we got the advantage. We're really strong. We're beating all these guys back." They're not thinking of what's happening around them. While Wallace and Prentiss are able to hold this position, the flanks of the Union line are still giving ground. They're still starting to fall back. And once we get to about 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the day, Grant's going to be starting to tell all of his guys, stop, fighting on this line. I've set up a new defensive position at the landing, very high ground, very good defense position. Let's start gradually pulling out. Nevertheless, the attacks will continue on the Hornet's Nest. And why it's called the Hornet's Nest? Every time the Confederates would go in, they were going under this relentless fire. And the continuous fire from the muskets and from the cannons sounded like angry hornets to them. And very early on in the battle reports, we will see, my apologies, I don't think we see them in the battle reports themselves, but in veterans' testimony, even just a few months after the battle, they referred to it as an angry nest of hornets, hence determined the location. And just to give you an idea what it was like to be in the Hornet's Nest, minus the undergrowth, very rarely are these Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers seeing each other. They're just firing blindly into the thickets where they're seeing the smoke in the distance, and they're firing pretty close. They're up to a lot of times they're not starting to fire off the guns till about 50 yards away. And then what happens midway through the actions at the Hornets' Nest, two regiments, the 58th and the 7th Illinois, who are in front of Duncan Field. So I want to switch back to Duncan Field here. They actually come out of the wagon road, swing to the swing, so their line is actually facing east, and they start firing into the flanks of these attacking soldiers. And they're using the cover of some of the hay bales and actually Duncan's cabin. So they got a really good defensive position. The attacks, the Confederates would try eventually to. There was this accidental massive assault. That's how I describe it, an accidental larger assault. You had a what was known as the Crescent Regiment, commanded by a Colonel Smith, and they're going to meet up with a General Gibson, who was commanded by Bragg to attack the Hornets' Nest. They both locate each other. It's like, instead of attacking one at a time, let's attack together. So the Crescent Regiment marched through Duncan's Field toward my apologies, I'm trying to see in the map. They're charging toward soldiers, Iowan soldiers, Illinois soldiers, while I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. My dog's barking downstairs. While you're going to have Anderson's brigade, they're marching right for the thickets, and they get very close, but again, they're turned back by the fire. So this keeps going on all day, and to make matters worse for the Confederate side of the attack, General Johnston is dead by mid-afternoon on April 6th. He had been shot in the foot, and due to the fact that this particular foot had been numb from an older wound he had received earlier in life, he didn't realize he'd been shot in the foot, and it actually hit an artery, and he bled out in minutes. So the commanding general of the Army of the Mississippi is dead. General Beauregard, the same Beauregard that was at First Manassas, is going to take charge of the Army of the Mississippi, and he too is trying to figure out, how do I crack this nut that's the center of the Union line? So eventually, he's going to detach a gentleman by the name of General Daniel Ruggles. Ruggles, right? Ruggles. Look at me. I don't know. Again, dogs barking, causing me to be distracted. I got three dogs actually, and one is really, really loud and really, really annoying. You just hear me panicking as they go for bay. Yes. Okay. Okay. Yes. Daniel Ruggles. So believe it or not, it was actually born in Massachusetts. So we got a Massachusetts-born Confederate general. He's in charge of a division in the Army of Mississippi. And what Ruggles is going to do, he finally listens to the pleads of these lower-ranking Confederate officers who've been attacking all day and not succeeding at all, that they need artillery to support the attack. The Union divisions of McClernand and Sherman retreating back to Pittsburgh Landing, and with Beauregard reinforcing the right flank and driving the Union soldiers through the peach orchard, they can now divert artillery to the Union center. And Ruggles is just going to start grabbing any artillery that he can. He's going to get about 50 pieces from different detachments, a mixture of 6-pound smoothbores, and we're also going to have some 12-pound howitzers. And he is going to start shelling the Hornets' Nest. They can't drive them out with infantry. Why don't we just shell them? And up to this point, this is the largest artillery bombardment of the American Civil War. And all this is raining down concentrated fire on the thickets where Wallace and Prentiss have been holding out. Now, Confederate artillery during the American Civil War is historically light on caliber. It's not so they were not likely making very accurate hits into the Hornets' Nest. But what they were doing was rattling the soldiers that were in there. We have approximately about 3,000 soldiers that are jam-packed into the Hornets' Nest. And these guys have been under fire all day. And even though they don't realize even though these regiments have been attacking them were small, it still was a lot to hold off. Just firing, 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 hugging the ground, trying to use anything for defense in the thickets. And now you're being hammered by artillery from all directions. These guys would be shell shocked. These guys are going to be starting to be panic. They're going to be starting to break under pressure, and I don't blame them. So this starts around 4:30, this bombardment. And as the bombardment progresses, the Confederate Army starts wrapping around the Hornet's nest. It is going to start wrapping around it like, being drawn to it like a magnet. They've driven everybody else off the field, and now they're being ordered to come in and drive out the last of the Union forces on the field. So, what has become a great defensible position for soldiers from Iowa, from Illinois, from Missouri, from Ohio is now about to become a trap. William H.L. Wallace realizes what's about to happen, that this trap is coming down around the Hornet's nest, and he's able to tell two of his Iowa regiments, "We're getting out of here. Spread the word." Unfortunately, while they're trying to escape, Wallace and these Iowan soldiers are trying to basically run a gauntlet of crossfire. Both sides, the Confederates are firing them at the crossroads. I'm gonna start singing songs at the crossroads here, and if you can see where the blue dot is, right there, where the Eastern Corniff Road meets with the Corniff Pittsburgh Road, William H. A. Wallace will be shot in the back and mortally wounded. He will fall from his horse. One of his orderlies, which was his brother-in-law, believe it or not, he is going to try to grab Wallace and get a few orderlies together to carry Wallace off the field, but the Confederates are coming down around him too quickly. They drop his body and flee back to Pittsburgh Landing. Those Iowan soldiers will be the lucky ones. As you can see in this map, Prentice and Wallace's divisions are now back to back, and everybody's realizing they've been surrounded. Some are going to surrender. Prentice is going to get a white flag out and start riding back and forth to cease fire. Others are not going to get the order, and they're going to continue fighting to the last. Some are angered that they weren't given you, that they didn't, that why did nobody communicate them that the rest of the army of the Tennessee had withdrawn, and they start breaking their rifles so the Confederates cannot capture them. There's one particular story, I forget off the top of my head the numbers of the regiments, but one Confederate regiment forced, I believe it was it was an Iowa regiment that told them, "You're surrounded, surrender." And the Iowans are like, "If we can't surrender, because just because you guys are accepting that to surrender, the Confederates be on the other side don't notice." So these Union soldiers are told to go into their tents. Remember, this whole area had been encampment before the battle. Go into their tents and basically seek shelter so they don't get shot by other Confederate regiments coming in. So, I mean, truly given the name the Hornets nest, all these bullets whizzing back and forth, 360 degrees. By 6 p.m., the Confederates finally take the Hornets nest. 2,200 Union soldiers will be captured as a result. Uh, Several hundred, of course, have been either killed or gravely wounded. But as you can see, the Union Army has retreated to the north to the heights over around Pittsburgh Landing. The Confederates cannot mount the assault because it's dark. It's just too treacherous ground, and they will reap the benefits of their day, plundering the encampment. We'll again end here. This is probably the most famous lithograph done of the battle, and again, very good depiction of the final moments, being surrounded. Oh, that's spoiler alert. All right. All right. So what so that is the story of the Hornet's Nest, but that's not the myth of the Hornet's Nest. What results is Prentice is the highest ranking officer captured within the Hornet's Nest. As I mentioned, Wallace was mortally wounded. So Prentice is really the only major authority to write on the Hornet's Nest after the battle. And, well, Prentice's regrets of the career in the war didn't go so well. He fell out of power. He fell out of political favor with a few officers, and he actually resigned in 1863. Obviously, he was a Confederate prisoner for several months. Well, in his later years, he started going around talking about his time in Shiloh, and he started saying about all these events that happened in his division and about how he held out to the last of the Hornets. He held out at all hazards. And by doing so, he claimed, and a lot of veterans believed this, that they had saved the rest of the army of the Tennessee that day, that they had bought time for Grant's army to retreat and set up new defenses. There's a few problems with this. Grant had given the order, seems to have given the order to retreat far earlier. A lot of the army was in mass retreat by 3 o'clock that afternoon, and both on left and right had been those division commanders, McClernand. They'd all been communicated. Get your guys out of here gradually. Let's fall back. Artillery was being pulled from the Hornets' nest around 4 p.m. It should have been a sign that, hey, we're bugging out. You guys probably should start withdrawing as well. Probably why the Wallace and Prentice's divisions did not retreat. Combination of the chaos in those thickets, the basically the order did not reach down the line. Somebody had failed to communicate it to the next guys over, so they just kept holding out. Also, Prentice probably took hold at all hazards very literally. It's very clear he took it very literally, almost to a defeatist level. So, uh, Prentice would build that the surrender of these Union soldiers and those lives that were lost in the Hornets' Nest was a noble sacrifice. But in reality, it was a pointless sacrifice. It was in vain. Those guys did not need to hold out at that position for that long. And ultimately, a lot of those guys, some of those prisoners are not going to be going to very good conditions later in the war. So, some of those guys are probably going to die because they were taken prisoner. Other things to point out is newer research has shown when you really start tallying the death and wounded tolls of the Battle of Shiloh, it's not at the Hornets' Nest. The Hornets' Nest doesn't rank anywhere near the other locations. The bloodiest part of the battlefield is actually the western portion around the crossroads, around Shiloh Church and pushing to the west, and also the aforementioned Peach Orchard. And, I mean, people, and again, I'm not taking away, people did die at the Hornets' Nest. But as we mentioned, these were not big Confederate attacks being made on the Hornets' Nest. They were piecemeal, one at a time. The guys in the Hornets' Nest did not know that because they couldn't see because of the thickets and the smoke. So they thought they were being attacked by larger numbers, which is probably why the veterans believed what Prentice was promoting that, hey, we saved the Army of the Tennessee. Our surrender was not in vain. So it's a very tragic story. It's one of them. It's a story of miscommunication on both sides. The Union, Prentice and Wallace did not evacuate as they should have. They took Grant's words too literal, and all day, the miscommunication on the Confederate side, they weren't able to put the proper numbers, the proper pressure on the Hornets' Nest that probably would have driven Wallace out much easier. But again, it's not their fault. They were bogged down by the terrain. And now, what ultimately does happen? My story makes it sound like it was a Confederate victory, the Battle of Shiloh. Well, most of you watching, if you know what becomes, uh, famous lines between Sherman and Grant are said the night of April 6th. Sherman says, we've had the devil of a day, sir. And Grant replies, yep. Licked them the next day, licked them at morning. And what happens is Buell's Army of the Ohio arrives late in the afternoon under the cover of darkness. The division of Lew Wallace is going to arrive and reinforce Grant on his right flank. So in the morning of April 7th, the roles are reversed. It is now the Confederates that are going to be caught by surprise and attacked. And all the ground that the Army of Mississippi had gathered that day on April 6th is all lost by April 7th. So all that fighting over the Hornets' Nest, all pointless in the end. Ultimately, the battle, Shiloh, 3,000 Americans would lose their lives from this engagement. And essentially, this heralded to a lot of Americans at home, this is not going to be a simple war. This is going to be a bloody war. And events like the Battle of Shiloh are going to be repeated over and over throughout 1862, throughout 1863, 64, 65, and then all the way in the trenches around Petersburg. This battle was brutal. And when doing the research about the Hornets' Nest, something that very surprised me was the heavy artillery, the amount of how important the artillery plays. This concentrated fire, shelling the position, then launching another assault. Kind of something you're going to see later on in history, particularly in World War One, the heavy bombardments. So, Battle of Shiloh, the terrain definitely foiled the plans that the Army of Mississippi had. Definitely allowed for the Army of the Tennessee to salvage the battle. And one other thing about Prentice, as I said, he went on. He's the only real major. He's the major commander to survive the Hornet's Nest. Wallace's story, I should say Wallace before Prentice. Wallace, believe it or not, actually was alive after his wound. He spent all night mortally wounded in the Hornet's Nest. And when the Union retook the grounds the next day, they found him and they were stunned to believe the guy's still breathing. And to make the story even more extraordinary, his wife, Ann Dickey Wallace, had actually gone on a steamboat, volunteered to serve as a nurse, and had come to the Shiloh battlefield. She was there April 6th at Pittsburgh Landing, and on April 7th, she's able to reunite with her husband, though he is very badly wounded. And then Grant allows for Wallace to be taken to his headquarters up in Savannah, Tennessee, and he actually lingers for a couple days, but Wallace would ultimately succumb of his wounds. So Wallace, who the majority of the Union soldiers at the Hornets' Nest were Wallace's soldiers, their commander's dead. He doesn't get to write the history. Prentice does. And Prentice had a very bad morning at Shiloh. His division took the brunt of the first attacks. So, yeah, he kind of wanted to salvage his reputation. And so he kind of inflates his importance in the defense of the Hornets' Nest and the importance of the Hornets' Nest in itself. The Hornets' Nest, in my opinion, was a defense, a needless defense. Yes, it did kind of bewilder the Confederates. And yes, it did eventually pull all the Confederate forces on that position. But by then, Grant had already made his decision. He was pulling back to Pittsburgh Landing. What they had done was sheer bravado. And I don't want to take that away from what happened to those soldiers there. I'm not saying that those men, that they were cowardly. That is not at all. Those men stuck it out to the last. But miscommunication. They should not have been in the Hornet's Nest after 4 o'clock at Shiloh. That is because of miscommunication. And Prentice would try to salvage it from being a mistake to being no. This was a sacrifice. That's a sacrifice that saved the army. And Prentice would be apparently. I just read about this before going on stream. There was a cyclorama done of the Hornet's Nest, which is that surviving? I never heard about it, so I'm gonna assume it's not. But if it is surviving, can I see photos of it? I'd kind of like to see photos of it. But Prentice kind of pressed the artist to make him a very prominent figure in that cyclorama, and he was giving lectures at the cyclorama. And one more thing to talk about is who writes the history of Shiloh. The first major historian at the battlefield park was David W. Reeds, who was a veteran of the 12th Iowa who were at the Hornet's Nest. So his perspective of the battle was strictly at the Hornet's Nest. So you can't blame him. He's going to write from what he knows about. So he's going to talk about the Hornet's Nest and its importance. He wasn't there to see what happened at the Peach Orchard or what happened with McClernand and Sherman, those bloody fights around Shiloh Church. So because of who wrote the history, where they were that day, the Hornet's Nest became the dominant feature of the battlefield, and it does kind of help. It is geographically in the middle of the battlefield. Just it kind of it's kind of like the heart of the battlefield. The crossroads are nearby, all that. But more recently, people have taken a more gone back through. Timothy B. Smith is probably the biggest historian that's gone through and shown that the Hornet's Nest has been misinterpreted. And I don't think the Hornet's Nest should be knocked down any pegs. It's an important part of Battle of Shiloh, but again, it's not a noble sacrifice. It was a pointless sacrifice. But that's what I got to talk about the Hornets Nest of Shiloh. But we've got a few more things to talk about. And if you're watching, if you have anything you want me to discuss, throw it in the chat. But in the meantime, we've got a few more things I would like to cover. A few more things. So, the National Guard of Pennsylvania History Project, the NGB History Project. These guys have been popping on my radar the past number of months on Instagram and on Facebook, and kind of the answer to some of my prayers. The NGB History Project is a non-for-profit organization that explores the history, research, and events concerning the National Guard of Pennsylvania from the years 1866 to 1917. We accomplish this through educational programming, publishing research, sharing imagery, and living history events. So I've had a very keen interest in the history of the National Guard of my state because, not necessarily because of well, partly because of the Civil War, because veterans of the war went on to become commanders of the National Guard, and the National Guard participated in the Spanish American War, or as my history textbooks are telling me, we should now call the War of 1898. But it's also because of the history of the labor movement in the Pennsylvania coal mines. Uh, we talked about it before on the channel, and we did a video called the Morewood Massacre. And what ended up happening was elements of the 10th Pennsylvania National Guard, they ended up against orders deploying to defend a coke works owned by Henry Clay Flick outside of the town of Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania. They weren't supposed to. The governor told them they weren't supposed to, but they broke into the armory anyways, armed themselves, and ended up killing nine individuals. And this would be a pretense for the much larger Battle of Homestead in 1892, when Pinkerton agents fought it out with the amalgamated amalgamated steelworkers. The readout struggling here. So they were, and then the National Guard was brought in to end the Battle of Homestead. Before that, the National Guard deployed to try to bring some stability to the city of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, after its devastating flood in 1889. So I've had a keen interest of seeing people interpret the National Guard. So very excited about these guys, and they actually have an event coming up here that I want to highlight. So let's go to events. Where are you at? Oh, a couple more things. There we are. 125th anniversary of the Spanish American War. They're going to be doing a variety of events this year, and one of them we got right here. We're going to go to the hate book. Oh, oh, what's happening? I had this, it never fails. I have this stuff all set, ready to go, and then the internet's like, no, you're going to look like a fool. You don't know what you're doing. It's partly true. I don't know what I'm doing, but just go to Facebook page. All right, here we go. This is what I wanted to show you guys. So the NGP History Project are promoting that there is going to be a ceremony to commemorate the 125th anniversary of the Spanish American War, mustering in on the National Guard of Pennsylvania at Camp Hastings at Mount Gretna, Gret, Gretna, Pennsylvania. I want to learn how to pronounce that. It's in my own state. Should. So on May 6th, 2023, they're going to be hosting a commemoration event where the National Guard of Pennsylvania organized and were drilled before they went off to fight in the Spanish-American War. It's going to be taking place at Soldiers Field Hall of Philosophy and the Mount Gretna Historical Society in Mount Gretna, Pennsylvania. It's an all-day event. It's going to include a scavenger hunt for kids and adults. There will be a big opening ceremony. The Historical Society will also be open with displays. There will be lectures about the war in the Philippines and other involvements we had during the Spanish-American War. So very excited about that. And they actually just did a couple weeks ago, a couple weeks, last week, they were actually set up at the Pennsylvania Military Museum. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend. I really want to, but they were doing the Men of Iron, Pennsylvania, and the Great War, and they were doing lectures at the memorial wall for the 28th Infantry Division, which is later more infamously known as the Bloody Bucket in the Second World War. But they have a big shrine up at the Pennsylvania Military Museum dedicated to 28th Infantry, and the NGP History Project were set up. And I believe these folks have been doing. They're going to be doing events throughout the year with the Pennsylvania Military Museum. We do a few other events. I think it'd be really cool if I can find a way to see if I can get one of their representatives on Uncut History, or we do a pre-recorded interview, because I am very interested to learn about the National Guard history in Pennsylvania. So, if you're going to be in the Gretna area, the Mount Gretna, Pennsylvania area, May 6th, consider stopping by and helping out support this event. And now it is time for our weekly highlight of Iron Age culture. So you've probably been hearing me ramble the past couple weeks that are we in a cultural decline or cultural renaissance? And when I thought why I think it's so important to talk about some of these things, yes, I'm a historian and my focus predominantly on nonfiction, on real life historical events, but how we a lot of these historical events influence fictional stories that we tell people, that how we pass down things. And let's be honest, right now, a lot of the stories being told in the movie theaters and in the books, it's shit. Yeah, I said it. It's shit. Nothing, especially in American movies. Not a lot's coming out good right now. You could take influence from a lot of these historical events and make for very fascinating stories. So you can literally tell these stories, or just take some influence from them and make them into something new. Make a new fantasy world based off of, I don't know, something. Just make something original. And I'm more than happy to help champion and promote to potential consumers out there some of these new independent creators that are making content, making new stories that will be passed down for future generations. I am all about building culture, whether it be making videos that explore unknown parts of local history around me or big events that deserve being remembered across the world, or by promoting, hey, buy this magazine. So here we are. This week's highlight is the Anvil Iron Age magazine issue number uno, being done by ironage.media. We talked about them in episode 6 of Uncut History. And a couple weeks ago on Indiegogo, they released their fundraiser to create a physical magazine to support Iron Age independent creators. And as you can see, it has already had a resounding support. We are 452% over its flexible goal, and there's still 25 days left. Before I continue, I'm going to drop a link there in the description. There is a link in the description below, but I'm going to drop one right there for anybody who wants to go right now. Very nice, very easy. All right, here we go. In this age of derivative and propagandist mainstream media, creators across mediums and genres have begun pushing back. Anvil celebrates and highlights those artists and authors draw on inspiration from the roots of comics and pulp, heralding the rediscovery and refocus on quality over ideology, which is already underway and gaining momentum. Anvil is the first official step in the world of publishing by Iron Age Media, a site focused on connecting Iron Age creators with new fans. The dedication and growth from the community surrounding this site has allowed me to pull together a fantastic team to bring this magazine to fruition. Daniel P. Riley of Whimsyland as editor, and Jacob Kalta of 365 Inventory as designer. Together with the fantastic Iron Age authors and artists we have collaborated with, the first issue is over 100 pages of pure talent, guaranteed to blow you away. And there's the cover. And the one of the featured stories is actually going to be a 10-page preview of Ghost of the Badlands by Razor Fist and G Prime 85. Also, we're going to have the story Fleet of Thesis, Theseus by Daniel J. Snow. We got several other offers there. Ooh, looking down to a giant pit of despair. And there's what the magazine will look like. Different tiers. If you just want to get the magazine, physical and digital, will be $25 right now. But if you want to go up a little bit, you can get some of these morale posters and prints. $32 just for one. Or if you want to take them all home, that'll be $32 as well. And then we have additional goals, additional stretch goals. Oh, there's some artwork. I think that's for the Badlands comic. There's some of the stories. But you can read more about that. You can hit the link in the description below. And if you want a magazine that brings you back to the days of old school pulp, but by new creators, there you go. New stories being told. We are building culture one piece at a time. All right. Well, that is going to do it for this episode of Uncut History. I'm not certain I'm going to be doing a stream next Thursday. It's still up in the air. Theseus. 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 Okay, guilty gear here. We'll go with Theseus. I'm unsure if I'm going to be able to do a stream next week. I'll just have to see how things are. I'm bouncing a lot of things at the moment. Once I turn this computer off, I'm going to try to get the next retrace in history video up and loaded. I had to process that today. I got to get to doing work on the Great Gatsby episode of Heterochromia. I know I've been delaying. And hello, Guilty Gear. Hello, Guilty Gearhead. So I got to get the next episode of Heterochromia up. It's been sitting on standby, but I've been busy with college work. And actually, once I turn the stream off, I'm going to be going to college work. I might be doing a stream all night just to procrastinate, but I'm not going to procrastinate anymore. So if you enjoyed this stream, and if you enjoyed the stream, be sure to show the algorithm by hitting the thumbs up button. It's right over there. Just hit it. It's not hard. It's right over there. If you want to tell me in a constructive manner historical inaccuracies I made, because I know I probably made several. Like I said, I'm not an expert in the Battle of Shiloh, but I wanted to commemorate the 161st anniversary. So I want to talk about the Hornets' nest, which is what got me first invested into the battle. Okay, Theseus, okay. So if you want to rip me a new one constructively, you can do that in the comments down below. Or if you have an idea for something you want me to cover on Uncut History, also leave that in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe to Readout Productions. We do Retracing History, where we go to different historical locations. We also will be doing, I'm trying to get my Falling Water documentary, at least the first episode, up here before the month's over. So we do all sorts of different history here on the channel. And if you want to go the extra mile, get me woke up every morning with a nice cup of cappuccino, you can do so by donating at my Ko-fi page, and the link in the description is below. Well, you know what this means. It is time to hear that wonderful song. If I can play it. Here we go. There it is. I did it. I did it. All right, guys. We'll see you in the next video of Uncut History. I'll just see you next time. Okay. I got to do college work.